Hi, Holland. How's it going, man?
Hey Rob, I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Welcome to
Yeah.
my little interview session that I'm doing for the Composer's Voice TV show.
Thanks. I'm really pleased to be here.
It's good to have you. Miolina is going to be joining us. That's Lynn Bechtold and Mioi Takeda. But while we got you here, Holland, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Why don't you tell us your name, who you are, what you do, how you do it, so forth.
Sure. My name's Holland Hopson, and I am a composer and media artist. And I also teach at the University of Alabama in New College, which is the interdisciplinary school where students design their own majors. Um, and so right now, my work is both in the sound world, making music or sound art, and also in the media art and visual art world, doing work that involves technology and data in some way.
Fantastic. And why don't you tell us a little bit, like how'd you get into this?
That's a good question. um, I'm not sure about. I don't know that I have a really tight origin story. Um, I was interested in the edges of music that I had access to when I was growing up, where it was a different kind of media landscape, and so seeking out the strange kind of sounds led me um, into interesting musical territories. And then finding those connections with the visual artists was really quite natural, because so many of the artists that I liked were inspired by or collaborating with visual artists. And working with technology made that connection really easy too. So, there's that whole New York school with Cage and the connections with Rauschenberg and Johns. But then it goes all the way up through the art and technology world from there into like Bell Labs and the connections with the early digital art, visual art, with the invention of digital audio as we know it. So, in my mind, all these things have been connected all along.
Well, I think a lot of sort of electronic music is uh, I guess in a lot of ways, let's just say, first of all, it's really new compared to like the history of music, right? I mean, the history is, I mean, music is from when, like, before we first started history, right? I mean, let's be honest. So there, it's really new, but there's also that, I mean, for you and me, the tradition is like older than us, and there's been a lot of interesting things, but it's an interesting sort of dichotomy going on there, right?
Sure. And the tradition is definitely older than us. And yet the tools that keep coming up are younger than us, like every year, every decade at least, there's a new set of tools. And so um, that's always exciting. I love to learn new things. And so it's always fun to get to learn new. Uh, get to learn new software, work with new hardware, think about new ideas. Although I think some of the same, the ideas that I'm interested in aren't necessarily driven by the technology, but it's kind of a feedback loop, where there's an interesting technology, and that allows me to go deeper into a particular process or um, idea that I had. Um, and I guess an example is like, one of the qualities of electronic music is that it doesn't ever have to end until you pull the plug.
Right.
right? That it could just keep going forever and forever. And we hear this in music made by, say, Lamont Young or Alvin Lucier, or so many other people who are interested in durational works. And I haven't done a lot of very, very long form pieces, although many of my pieces are open form or modular, and so performers can decide the durations themselves, and most of the time they decide relatively reasonable duration, human durations. But that idea is kind of hanging in the background in the work, right? That that it could just keep going, and that when the piece starts, we're just dipping into it where we are, that maybe in some conceptual way it's already ongoing, and that when it ends it just stops, and that in some conceptual way it continues. So
Absolutely. And so now I'm going to press you on that because I know exactly what you're talking about because I have heard both your music and you know the group here, is it See Here Now? Is it that?
yeah, I'm not familiar with See
Uh,
Here Now.
it's with stuff like is it Robert Anderson and but like this giant group of sort of what's the right word for them? Maximalists in like
Right,
creating really long, intense pieces that
right,
sustain. Why don't you
right.
talk to us a little bit about that? Because I don't think you know. Besides being in the field,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, I I don't know that I think of my work as maximalist, though it certainly could be. Somebody might hear it that way. For me, let's see, how do I talk about that? Hmm. Um, One of the driving forces for me is that the performers themselves have a certain amount of agency, and maybe more agency than is typical for notated music. And and an easy way to open that door for them is to allow them to take their time and and not be driven by an external cue. You know, like, okay, it's 93 seconds, time to move to the next thing. Instead, it's let's listen to what's happening and decide whether it's time to move to the next thing and when it's time to move to the next thing. Um, and so that's a way just to open up space to let things happen.
you know what? And with that said, the musicians get to dictate, right? They are here.
Oh,
Hey,
great!
hey, there they
Yay!
come. Hi. Hey, Lynn and Mio, you ladies there? Hi. We were just talking about how musicians get to dictate the time.
Yeah, sorry. So, school Wi-Fi went totally down, so now we're on my phone. So hopefully it works.
rock on. Let me. So you know, I didn't know if you guys heard it when you were logged in before, but you understand we're going live. We're going to be cutting in this for the TV show and so forth. You're all good with that, right?
That's fine. Sorry, it was such a mess today. Like Wi-Fi's never gone out here. They have like 3 strong signals, and the whole school went out. It's just been a rough. But anyway, we're all good now.
You know what? Please don't apologize for technology.
And for technology.
You know, it's the show goes on, right?
Yeah.
You know, we can probably even talk about that a little bit later. So wait, so we're doing introductions. Should why don't Lynn and Mioi, you just say who you are, what you do, how you do it, and then maybe after that talk a little bit just about Miolina.
Okay, you want to go first? Okay, I'll go first. Okay.
Go for it.
Hi, we're Miolina. I'm Lynn Bechtold. This is Mioi Takeda. And we're a violin duo based in New York City. So we had the pleasure of going to Alabama last spring to perform Holland's new piece that he wrote for us. So that was really fun. And I believe that's what we're talking about today and other musical things. Anyway, yeah, we do a lot of contemporary music for the most part, but we also do some Baroque things and other classical pieces. We just played a Joseph Boulogne Chevalier de Saint-Georges last spring, which was kind of fun.
Excellent. And well, I'm gonna go to Mioi. Mioi, why don't you just say your name, tell us who you are and what you do?
I'm Mioi Takeda. I'm a violinist, and I play violin, and I play with Lynn. And I play lots of contemporary music, and I'm sure you like contemporary music too.
Excellent. Well, so whose piece did you play? Oh, this guy's. Why don't you tell us a little bit like how that came about? Well, we can let Holland talk later. He's already been talking. Why don't you guys just tell us about how you came across the piece? What do you think of it? How you played it? Just another piece? What's up?
Sure. Well, we met Holland, I think first in New York. We were on a similar concert, but we didn't play together. And then Miolina was asked to perform at I think it was the 2017 Birmingham New Music Festival, which is sponsored by Birmingham Art Music Alliance. And they had a whole call for pieces for us. And we performed a different piece of Holland's, which we premiered back then, which was also a really cool piece for Max and violin duo. And then, so we were in touch sort of during the pandemic saying it would be cool to do something else, since it's been a while. And so because of, I'm going to mess up the name. What is it called, Holland? The Advanced Research at the University of
It's called CARI, C-A-R-I, Collaborative Arts Research Initiative.
Okay, thank you. Because of him having an affiliation there, we were able to go down and kind of workshop the piece, and also a couple other cool pieces for violin duo and banjo. Not just a couple, probably like 5 or 6, which we also performed in New York last year. So we started working on this piece and those violin duo banjo pieces, I think June of 2021 down in Alabama. And then we also went to Avaloq Music Institute together in New Hampshire for a week and continued working on all of this music. And then this past March, Holland finished the piece when we were down there. We were working on it. And so then we finally performed it after being there for a week. And that was the premiere performance, which we also recorded. So that's sort of the ongoing collaboration.
And there's only one spot that you skipped, which was your CD that you made, because in 2017 you played a concert of music by Alabama composers, and then you came back to Alabama during the summer to record all of those pieces. And we stayed in touch after that because I was involved in mixing and the kind of post-production of that audio. Eventually that CD was released as Alabama.
Right.
Yeah. So all Miolina playing all music of composers based in Alabama.
Beautiful. I love it. Great. So Miolina, why new music?
Why?
Right? I mean, or is there just not enough old music for violin duo? I don't think people understand how kind of violin duo isn't really a traditional instrumentation, right?
Well, in Baroque times it was. There were some pretty well-known pieces for it, but then I think with maybe the dawn of Paganini and virtuoso soloist violinists, it all became about the, main violin concertos with lots of hijinks that you can show what a stellar violinist you are. And it kind of got away from violin duos. So there's not much between Baroque period and there's a couple little Mozarts, I think, some of which maybe were written by him, maybe weren't. and maybe a few. There's a composer named Pleyel, who I really like, who is based in France, who wrote, but those are a little bit more student level duo pieces. And then it wasn't until Bartók wrote his 44 duos, I think in the 1920s, 1930s, that it kind of brought the violin duo back, and people were like, oh, maybe this is a cool thing. And then there still weren't a lot, but Prokofiev wrote one, and then Berio wrote in the 1980s like a whole set of violin duos. So that kind of got it going. And now I think a lot of people are writing, and there are definitely like us and another well-known violin duo in New York named String Noise, who are friends of ours. And then there's even like, I think one more that's kind of like also now playing violin duos in New York. So just in New York alone, there are now 3 violin duos, so, which is cool. So yeah, and I guess we both have played a lot of contemporary music our whole lives. And it's nice.
So it's just practicality then?
No, we like working with living composers. You always have more of a say in what's happening as opposed to having to play like a tradition of Mozart, which is beautiful, but there's a certain tradition there. So if you don't do the tradition, people think you either didn't learn properly or you just are playing sort of out of the style. So.
Sure. Well, why don't you talk a little bit about that? I don't think people really get like paint. It's what's the difference between a living and a dead composer and playing like the style or.
Right. Well, I guess when you go to like serious conservatory programs or really good music departments at universities, hopefully you're studying with a teacher who was a student of so-and-so who was a student of so-and-so, and it goes back historically, like way back to European Western classical tradition. And so there's certain styles to how you play Baroque music, how you play classical period music, how you play Romantic era music. So for example, Baroque music, you don't use a lot of vibrato. You usually tune to a lower pitched A. If you're really serious, you will actually have your violin set up more in an old style, and you'll have a Baroque bow, which is a convex bow, not a concave bow like you see that most people play in modern times. So you'll kind of follow that style. And if you're playing classical music, there's a little bit more decoration to the music, and maybe you'll use a little bit more vibrato. But the music is, I would say it's very beautiful and clean, but there's not a lot of, say, schmaltz added to it. But then once you get past Paganini and all of that, then you have Brahms and Schumann and all the Romantic period composers that kind of, it started with Beethoven and Schubert, but then you have a lot of vibrato, you have a lot of double stops, you have a lot of tenths where you have to stretch like crazy to play. And so that the violin neck was angled differently, and the fingerboard was changed so that you had a lot more power and a lot more sound. And then in the 20th century with technology, people stopped playing gut strings, which don't project as well. They're very warm sounding, but they don't project as well. And now they're mostly, people still play gut strings, but more people play synthetic strings and then wound with silver or other metals. And those project a lot more so that the violin became a very loud, powerful instrument. Hope that helps. But with the traditions, like you learn how to play each period of music. And if you don't play them properly, like you have to go through juries every year at school. So then some, other professor or your professor might even say, oh my gosh, like you're playing so crudely. Didn't you learn what I taught you? So, I mean, there's also traditions in contemporary music as well. But I think with contemporary music, you have a little bit more back and forth, at least with living composers, to say, well, this works really well for violin, or maybe this is awkward, or maybe, I would suggest this or something. So it's kind of a more back and forth conversation, which is nice.
That's definitely what happened when we worked together on this piece, A Long Line of Clouds. Our first piece, I wrote it and just sort of handed it to you, and then you played it, which is it's a pretty typical way of working, because we don't have the luxury of being in the same room for a week or, even longer in our case. But for the piece we did together, as well as the violin duo and banjo works, it was really about how can we work together? How can the violin inform the electronics, and the electronics inform the violin. And, you know, Lynn says it very well, like maybe this is awkward or try this, but it goes beyond that. It's when we work together, for me, it was, oh, that's what I meant to write. You know, I was always writing something and they were always saying like, is this really what you want? Mioi would say, how about this? And it was, all right, that's what I mean to write. So it was very much a collaboration, putting the work together.
Well, and I think so. Well, first of all, I mean, I think that your works are specifically looking for collaboration. I mean, you were talking earlier about how, you know, your pieces held. You're giving the musician the space to breathe and decide for them how long something is, or how they're, well, at least the length, right? That's what. So you're looking specifically in your works for that sort of give and take, right?
Yes, for sure. And I'm also interested in a different kind of virtuosity than the Paganini kind of virtuosity, which is much more understated and doesn't read as virtuosity, but I think of it more like virtuosity of listening and of awareness and presence. And so the musicians are asked to do less in a way, but to do less in a more, okay, I'm going to start over, right?
Go for it.
Jump in if you can explain what it is that I mean, Mioi and Lynn, because you do so well at that, helping me articulate my ideas. So I'm interested in musicians listening more and playing less, which doesn't mean that they're suddenly being lazy, but it's exercising a different part of musicality. And so the scores might look rather simple, a lot of whole notes or footballs, as they're sometimes called, or not a lot of, you know, dark, complicated blotches on the page and complicated rhythms. And that's by design. It's so that the musicians aren't frenetically trying to keep up, and but instead can be occupied in a different sort of way, which is by expanding their listening all around them. I think I just said it.
We did.
Yes, we did.
So, well, no, I'm interested to know what Miolina is like. So, is Holland's music easy? Is that so?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's always fun to play Holland's piece, but also you have to always create something while you're playing and listening. So it can be challenged because not only me, but Lynn is also playing her part. So how we're going to expand is just living in the moment and playing in the moment. That is difficult. But as you know, she mentioned, we trained as a traditional musicians, so we could use that elements as well. You know, so when we started having ideas, Holland wrote lots of ideas, you know, on the blackboard or whiteboard. Whatever. So it helps me a lot to think about what is it, you know. So this piece always gives me to think. To expand the imagination of what I'm playing, at least.
Yeah, and I think you can't you go on autopilot with the piece. So, you know, you always have to be listening to each other. And then also the Max program that you designed, the electronics are also interacting with us. So, and every time it's different. So it's never the same. So if you're just kind of on autopilot, it might not be good, because even the Max patch might be doing something different the next time you perform it. So it kind of keeps you on your toes, which is good. So maybe on paper it looks more simple, but it's not simple mentally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, we're talking a little bit about traditions and so forth, and I have a couple ideas in my head, but let's talk about that first. So, Holland, we were talking a little bit about like, oh, there is an electronic tradition, even though it's kind of new, it's been around longer than us. And and there's music concrete and like there's a whole bunch of things. And I would say, I'll give you a story that I remember one of my teachers telling me about recordings. And it was like when the first recordings were coming out, someone had played something and recorded it. I think they were recording on a drum, believe it or not. They were recording in England of someone's piece in France, or no, it was the other way around. Somebody recorded it in France and so forth, and they were playing it in England. And the first thing that they did was compare it against the recording, right? So like, this is it. This is how the composer recorded it. This is how it's supposed to be, and so forth. And especially with media and electronics and so forth, I would say at least for most of the beginning of electronic music, it's been concrete, right? I mean, solid. Like, this is it. Wait, you said if one of your points was like, oh, the sound can keep going as long as you have electricity. And at first, I was thinking that you were thinking like, oh, the sound can keep going as long as you have the physical product, right? It has it's like paintings in the back. Like, as long as you have it, the music exists, right? Like, back in, as composers, especially in the past, we've relied on scores to bring the music forward. And that's where tradition is so important, right? Because otherwise it can change if it goes into interpretation. But I one of the things, but what you're talking about is electronics that isn't concrete, right?
That's right. There's an element that stays the same, but I'm really interested in allowing the piece to change and be sort of situated where, based on what happens right before it, right after it, in the moment, and that comes out of a tradition too. In terms of interactive electronics, there are lots of different approaches. A person who I really am indebted to is David Behrman, who pioneered some of this work with Kim Computer and did some really important pieces for me. Is it On the Other Shore of the Ocean, cello and live electronics? And Behrman's pieces always, maybe not always, but Behrman's pieces seem to place the performer kind of within a field of sound, and the performer's actions would influence that sound, but it wasn't a direct relationship. The cellist would play a phrase, and it's not like the computer would just spit it back out or echo it, but something would shift somehow. And that approach has definitely informed my work. In fact, the piece that Miolina and I made together, they are controlling what's going on, but they don't know how they're controlling what's going on. Well, they do know how they're controlling what's going on, but it's not that they can make decisions that are going to this is complicated. They know that they're affecting the outcome, but they can't gang up together and like defeat the computer in a way, right? It's not a video game. Yeah.
Live performers versus the computer.
Right. So an example maybe would make this clearer. In the piece, I give them sets of pitches, and in this piece, it has a lot to do with whether they play ascending or descending phrases, and it changes during the course of the piece. It's very much an arch form, where it starts out in a particular way and then it ends kind of in the opposite way. And so the computer knows that they're going to be playing these different sounds and that the sounds are going to change over time. Their pitch choices get to change over time. Their rhythms and gestures and whether they're rising or falling gets to change over time. And one of the main things that the computer is listening for is the distance between the two performers. Right? So are they close together? Are they far apart? And so that changes in a generally predictable way because they have fewer choices at this point and more choices at another point, and then later it'll go to fewer choices again. And so the computer's definitely going to respond to that, but we can't say for sure, like, oh, I'm going to play this note and you play a major third higher and we're going to make it do this thing. But as they play, they create a kind of interwoven texture, and then that texture generates data that drives the sounds around them.
Right. So the algorithm is kind of the composition, a free-flowing composition.
That's right. Yeah, for sure. And so it's always different, but always generally stays the same. Right? I mean, it's a pretty static piece. Moment to moment, it could be quite different, but the Mioi and Lynn aren't going to start playing the piece and it suddenly shifts gears into something that they've really never, ever heard before. So I think of it like playing on a playground. You have a lot of, you can go and you can swing on the swings for a while, or you can go on the merry-go-round, but it's still basically within that playground. We've set up the area to operate within. And then finally, to connect this to your comment about fixed media. So yes, we have a recording of it, but there are so many different versions of the piece that could be performed. And part of our workshop together was figuring out the way that Miolina wants to play this piece, and that also helps me figure out what the piece is. But someone else could play it and it might be quite different. I mean, the duration is open. The time between sections could be open. Lots of individual choices the performers have is really up to them. So even though we have a recording of the piece, there are many more that could be done. And so there's no one official version per se.
But there is, right? I mean, I guess that's kind of the interesting thing is just, which it's a hard concept to understand a little bit. Here's your composition, and it is a composition, but the results seem fluid. There's kind of a controlled freedom. I would say the best example, for most people to grab onto would be like jazz and the blues, right?
For sure. Yes. And part of my background was as a saxophonist. I was definitely interested in jazz and in improvisation, free improvisation. And now I'm active as a banjo player in traditional Appalachian styles. And that is very similar. The tunes are recognizable, but everyone plays them differently. And sometimes recognizable is a stretch. But the tradition is to take the material and find your own way through it and work with your community to bring it to life. And so I'm interested in that, not as a slavish adherent to a particular style or regional style, or maintaining a particular banjo player's approach, but rather allowing my approach to be informed and confirmed by other approaches around. So just to engage in that process is really fun.
And Miolina, Lynn and Mioi. So there's a lot there, right? I am curious. First of all, I'm definitely, players versus machine. And with I would say with electronic music, there's a lot of both concrete and collaborative and sort of this thing. There's a lot going there, but more of so what do you think about that? And also, what do you think about sort of the difference between stuff that's like electronic playback, which like, something's playing, on speakers behind you and so forth, compared to like an algorithm or a computer that's making the music, or at least following the instructions from the composer.
Right. Well, I think with the live electronics, it's sometimes more fun. But the only issue, sorry, they're doing construction here. That's
Welcome to New York.
Natural electronic music. I think with the live electronics, it can be a lot more fun, and it's like the sense of, every time is different, sort of in a, aleatoric, almost sort of along that same kind of way, which is nice. But the only issue with the live electronics is that anytime you add elements like that, there's more cables involved, there's more algorithms involved, and the only thing is sometimes that can affect even if the dress rehearsal goes super smooth, sometimes in a performance, and I'm not talking about Holland, I'm talking about other pieces that play, but suddenly everything will cut out, sort of like our internet here this morning, like just suddenly you're like, what's happening, and you have to figure out which element is causing the problem. And that can take time, or it can delay performances or things like that. So I think sometimes with live electronics, when it goes smoothly, it's amazing. But when it doesn't, depending on your audience, sometimes they can get a little bit antsy or annoyed. So with the fixed stuff, I always write, I'm a composer too. I usually I don't like to have that element of, at least, the electronics still have sometimes had problems for me, even if they're fixed. And I usually, make my electronics from recorded sounds I get in the real world. But I always have it fixed just so I eliminate that element of surprise as much as possible. So for me, it's easier, but it's not that I don't like the live electronics. It adds an extra element of concern.
And how about you, Mioi?
We have some, challenges when it comes to performance. But beyond that, it's like, like a painting the picture with that flame, whatever the painting we can draw, maybe on the wall, it can be fun. So that's the thing I like about it.
That is awesome. So how about we were talking a little bit about the collaborative project and and how you guys met each other and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about, well, Miolina, like what do you guys do? Like what have you done with Vox Novus and Composer's Voice and in the past and stuff like that? Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think the main one we played on was, I think when we first met Holland, we were on one of your Circuit Bridges concerts, which was at Gallery MC. And so that was a fun night of different pieces with various performers. So that was cool.
Yeah, that was great.
And Holland, I guess why don't you talk a little bit? We've known each other a while because I think that we first got connected through the 60 by 60 series.
And you're going to have to help me with the date on that because it goes back a little bit.
It goes back a little bit. I'm thinking that it was probably somewhere around 2007, 2008.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Do you remember the piece that you submitted?
I do. Yes. I submitted a minute of a field recording that I had made in a bamboo hut in Thailand during a thunderstorm. So I found the right minute, and
it's a beautiful piece. It's so funny. So anyway, 60 by 60 is a long project, and we have had thousands of submissions and so forth. But as I'm here going, do I remember that piece? And as you describe it, I was just like, oh yes, I do. It's harder to remember pieces, later pieces, believe it or not. But in the beginnings, it was great. And so you're from Alabama. And,
yes.
Circuit Bridges went down there. But I feel like, have you been a part of Composer's Voice? I don't know.
I have not been part of Composer's Voice, except for the exchange that we did that Lynn referenced. So a group of composers came to Alabama during our New Music Festival, and from New York, composers and performers, and then a group of us came to New York for that event.
Right.
So that's been my only involvement with Composer's Voice so far.
And you work with Craig Hultgren too, right?
Absolutely. Who has a longer history, right, with Composer's Voice. Craig and I, actually, the piece that I made with Miolina really grew out of some techniques and processes and thoughts that I developed with Craig. So I imposed on Craig. I said, I'm coming to crash at your studio for a few days and let's make a piece together. And he said, okay, great. So so I showed up, and he was an amazing host, and we had a lot of fun. And I made a piece called Snakeskin Verso, and for cello and live electronics, and he has performed that quite a bit since then. It's really great. And anyone who hears that next to A Long Line of Clouds just above the trees will know that they are cut from the same cloth. So.
Well, how so? What makes you say that?
So both have ascending and descending figures, glissandi in them, so the instrument is moving gradually from one note to the next, at times more so in the cello piece, and both have a kind of floaty, atmospheric approach. Not really event driven. There's not a lot of rhythmic pulse. It's in a more of an ambient kind of space. And then some of the sound choices, if I'm with the electronics, I love making new sounds, but then there are the sounds that you just get hold of that are like, oh yeah, that feels like me. And so I'm going to use that one again here, and I'm going to use this one again over there. And so some of those same sounds and processes show up in those two pieces.
Right. And you know what? And while I got you here, why don't you tell me a little bit about Craig? I know Craig from being like I said, Composer's Voice back in the day. I think we started collaborating 2001, 2002. But why don't you tell me? So Craig is from Alabama. When you sat on his couch, was that in Iowa or?
That was in Iowa. That's right. But he and I met when he was playing in the symphony here, Alabama Symphony Orchestra in Birmingham, and that would have been in the mid '90s when we started the Birmingham Art Music Alliance, and so a group of us got together to kind of create a scene for contemporary music in Birmingham that didn't exist. And Craig is just such a great champion of new music and always open and encouraging. And so, I was very much a student at the time and would show up with crazy stuff and ask him to play it. He was ready to do it. And I wasn't the only one, right? So just like Miolina, he's really made an impact in encouraging composers and getting their works out there and developing a kind of repertoire. So, and then Miolina and Craig got to play together as a trio. That was when you came down to Birmingham for the first concert. Have you played with him since then?
No, it would be fun to do it again. We have to find another piece for 2 violins and cello. But yeah, he was great. I mean, he was like, showed up, we rehearsed it. He was awesome.
We should just play my 2 pieces simultaneously.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
They're sort of, one's like a child of the other.
Which piece did you play for 2 violins and cello?
Yeah, it was a piece by Takuma Ito called Across the Open Sky. He's a composer based in Hawaii.
It's a gorgeous piece.
Wow.
Yeah.
I gotta look it up. So why don't maybe Miolina, if you guys have anything that you want to talk about or plug or just anything at all, in fact.
Our anniversary season this year, so that's exciting. We're still working out like our concerts, but I think our first official big concert of the year will be November 20th. And it will include works by Alexandra Revelov, and probably we'll be including Dan Cooper, and then a Pauline Oliveros piece, which is all improvised, and another piece of Alexandra's. The first one is with a soprano, so it's based on a text by Hemingway called Along with Youth, and we'll be doing that with soprano Sharon Harms. And then we'll also be doing some of Alexandra's soundscapes, which are just paintings she made, and the paintings are the musical score, you could call it, which we then improvise based on the paintings. And then we're still working out a little bit of the program, but that'll be our first official concert, like big concert of our 10th anniversary season. We also just played Frank Wigglesworth last week a couple times. So he was one of the former heads of the American Composers Alliance and studied with Ferez and Otto Luning and Henry Cowell, and had an affiliation to the school we teach at, where we are right now. And so they just had their 120th anniversary. So we were asked to play that piece by Frank Wigglesworth called Trillium. And it was kind of a cool piece. So
sounds absolutely awesome. And how about you, Holland? What's coming up for you?
The next events for me are more in the visual art realm. I have a project that is called Tracing Thin Air. That's a collaboration with local artist Karen Brummond and local photographer Allison Grant. And we are putting together an exhibit that it runs for a month and culminates in an outdoor installation involving video and sound. And we're interested in air quality. We've been collecting data about air quality and how we can make visible the invisible or make audible the invisible. So one thing that I'm doing is sonifying the air quality data that we've collected for the event. So it'll be a kind of surround sound experience, and visitors will go to the installation and they'll get to see video pieces by Allison and by Karen and hear the data that that will be sonified. I've turned it into sounds, and I'm still working through that. So that's coming up. And then I'm also producing some video and some prints in connection with that show that are, I've been collecting the color of the sky, the average color of the sky every minute, pointed a camera at the sky and just grabbing that data. And so I'm using that to create visual art prints, as well as videos that address just our experience of air and the sky and how it changes and the changing colors and light. So that's a little bit of a hybrid project, and it's tons of fun. And I feel like Unlike when I got to work with Miolina, where we could sit down and concentrate on a small set of things, I feel like I'm making too many pieces in too many directions all at once, but that's kind of how I like it.
Rock on.
Yeah.
Performance. It sounds like a cool project.
Very cool.
When is it?
Oh, good question. The exhibit opens October the 4th. No, it doesn't. It can't open October the 4th. That's already passed. November the 4th.
There we go.
And then the installation is December the 2nd, and this is all happening in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And maybe it'll travel after that. We'll see.
Good luck.
Oh, and we've received, I should give a shout out to our funders. We've received funding from the Verdant Fund, which is part of the Andy Warhol Foundation.
Awesome.
We're very grateful for their support.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for being a part of this.
Yes. Can I shout out again for more funders?
Sure.
For the Miolina project? So,
Yeah.
and supporters. The Birmingham Art Music Alliance, also known as BAMA, their website's at artmusic.org, really jump-started all of this, and they're an important organization in my life, just like Composer's Voice, Vox Novus, right? Making a big difference, presenting work and supporting artists. And then specifically for this project, Lynn and Mioi already mentioned the Avalock Farm Music Institute in New Hampshire, and they hosted us for a week, and that was just great. They're amazing people in a great place. And then at the University of Alabama, the CARI program, Collaborative Arts Research Initiative, also supported our work. I was a fellow of the CARI program for a little over 2 years, and that was designed to encourage collaborations across disciplines and between people who may not have the chance to work together in quite as concentrated a way. And that really made a big difference in the development of this piece and our ability to work together on it for a long period of time.
Yeah, and thanks for having us, Rob. Like, you also do a lot for your music
Yeah,
with all your
thank you.
stuff. We appreciate that too.
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. So we're all in it together, right?
That's for sure.
Well, again, I thank you, Miolina. First of all, I thank you for playing so much of the contemporary music, library. It's vast and expansive, and as a composer, and I think I can speak for Holland, we're all really. It's great to have dedicated musicians with your talent to playing our work. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's important. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you for more.
Great. Good to see you. Thanks again.
Hey, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Keep playing aloud.